So a bit of background. I think Tobias already mentioned quite a bit in terms of my work at Deutsche Bank as well as JP Morgan. But I started my career actually in the software world. It was an accounting software, MYOB. Don't know if people have heard about that. Started there actually as a product manager and then kind of headed the design work. So I've kind of been on the business side, switched roles. And it was an interesting experience, software company, then to go to Wall Street and look at sort of that evolution. At Deutsche Bank, as Tobias has mentioned, I currently am responsible for the Autobahn platform, which is an e-distribution platform. So think about it as an app market, or app store from Apple. This is for all of Deutsche Bank's offerings, not just to external clients, but also internal sales traders, as well as middle office users. So before I begin talking about competencies, I just want to make sure that I make the distinction about the various segments in the financial markets. There's retail banking, right? We all experience that via web, mobile platforms. Example is online banking. Of course, there's a lot of innovation going on in that space with the various payment methods that banks are really watching closely, Apple Pay, PayPal. Then there's commercial banking, asset wealth management, treasury services, global transaction banking, investment banking. So I'm not here to talk about retail or wealth management. The area of business that I really focus on, and my team focus on, is the sell side of the business, which is investment banking. So what do they sell? They sell foreign exchange, stocks, commodities, futures contracts, bonds, credit products, derivatives, rates, inflation-related products, to other banks, to pension funds, mutual funds, hedge funds. Again, volumes are huge. I was just sitting down with a salesperson yesterday doing some usability testing in US Treasuries, and it was a 30 million trade was like, oh, that's a small thing. $500 million is what we talk about generally. So that's the volume you're talking about. With investment banking, you generally hear people also talk about front office, middle office, and back office. So what's front office? It's multi-asset coverage, workflow of sales and trading. Middle office is trade processing and management of regulatory connections. And then the back office is the integration of third-party back office and downstream systems. So my team really works closely with the front office and the sales trading teams. So this is the firm's sales force, right? So they are, what are they responsible for? They are responsible for conveying information about the particular securities to institutional investors. So for example, when a stock is moving unexpectedly, or when a company makes an earnings announcement, the investment bank sales force communicates these developments to the portfolio managers that are covering the particular stock on the buy side, the institutional investors. And the sales force also has constant communication with the firm's traders. So for example, they need to provide timely information about the market conditions, liquidity, of the firm, and of course of their clients as well. The traders are the final link in the chain. So buying, selling securities on behalf of these institutional investors and clients for their own firm in anticipation of changing market conditions upon any customer request. They always have what's also called the last look. So when sales puts their trades in, it's not really, sales are not trading, it's really the traders that need to get the final approval before the trade happens. Traders trade with other traders in commercial banks, investment banks, large institutional investors. Trading responsibility includes position trading, risk management, sector analysis, and capital management. And then there's the equity research side. So this is really more equity trading businesses from institutional investors, because this is sort of, this is the research that will have the potential of being first in line for the hot IPO shares that the investment banking underwrote. So as such, research has traditionally been there as a supporting function to equity sales and trading, and represents a significant cost to sales and trading as well. So as you can see from this slide, investment banking services, there's the advisory service and capital markets. And that's kind of the distinction that I wanted to make, kind of leading up to the competencies. Is really, we focus not on the advisory side. So we do, we may be engaged in certain tools that would help the advisory team, like tear sheets and other things when they have to go meet the clients. But we're mostly focused on the capital markets side, which is a trading platform, single dealer, multi-dealer platforms, FX trading, rates trading, credit trading, buy sales of traders, securities borrowing and lending, so those types of projects. Having now been in this industry for about, I'd say, 7 to 8 years, and given the theme of this conference, the future of UX design, my talk is about how UX is only very recently starting to get the focus in investment banking, and I think it's here to stay. However, for UX to be institutionalized in this segment of the industry, we need to, do things perhaps not so traditionally. Speaking with Lisa earlier, who's going to talk later about architecture and other, good things in the industry that she's focusing on, is, how there's a perception, and we need to break the perception about how UX is done in this industry. So, why does it need to be different? User research has very limited time to learn and understand the problem. There's very limited time to learn and understand. So I know we talked about research in a couple of other conversations earlier. It's a fast-moving market. There are new products coming out every day. So you really don't have the luxury, to kind of do 8 weeks of research and the 8 weeks of design and then kind of go into coding. I mean, some of the designs literally have to be done within a matter of days, implementation in a matter of a couple of weeks, testing, and the traders are using it. And this is, you're talking about multi-million-dollar, if not billion-dollar transactions. So also there's very limited literature. That's another thing that we discovered as we started working on the trading platforms. A trade life cycle has a lot of components, but in terms of the number of systems that are involved in it, they keep changing every day. So again, lots of, there's no documentation, period. I mean, if you're doing 6-week cycles, you're not going to get any documentation from anybody. There's no historical documentation, or the people that have, designed the systems are long gone, so there's nobody really you can count on either. So a very complex domain. The focus is on micro interactions, right? So it's a lot about users just being able to click on something and not about, is there a long workflow? Having said that, I think Ken touched on, systems design, very, very important to understand what's happening behind the scenes, because if you don't understand that, you could be putting the micro interaction in the wrong place, and that won't work either. Another interesting aspect is lots of proxy users, right? I guess we did talk about how everybody is a designer. True, and I think that's kind of really how we have to end up working. But the reality is that when I say proxy users, they're not actual users because these could be product managers sitting on the business side, or they could be sales. Because the perception is that if you're designing something for traders, they know best. Traders don't have time. They don't have time for usability testing. And there's some truth to the fact that they have limited time. But unless you're able to demonstrate that the feedback will help them be faster at what they do and make them more money, these folks are not really interested. So, as an example, just this week, as I was saying, I was doing some usability testing with sales, and so it's a junior salesperson, and what we're trying to do is capture trades, voice trades done electronically. And of course, this person sitting in their sales, they're thinking, okay, well, this is going to make my job redundant, so why should I help you? So when you're talking about those types of circumstances, that also makes it even more difficult to get feedback. Some people, have suggested, so with clients to do testing, well, why don't you offer incentives, right? Why don't you, in the software company, we'd give them certificate, $50 gift certificate. Small business owners are equally busy, so why don't you give them a certificate now? You're talking about a salesperson probably making $500,000, a trader making more than $1 million. The incentive is really not what will be sufficient for them, right? It's really demonstrating to them this application or this interaction is going to be useful, usable, quicker, will make them money, save them time, save them frustration. And same thing with external users. We can't offer them any incentive. There's lots of regulatory and compliance issues involved. We'd have to get permissions from committees before we can actually get there. So that's not also something that's very possible for us. So here's what the user experience designers will need to be competent at. Domain knowledge, business analysis, technical savvy, data visualization, and lean UX. So at UX practitioners, we get asked to come in and help solve, fix usability issues without deep understanding of the domain. So most of the time, after the development has already begun. As an example, about a year ago, my team was asked to help with a trading system for interest rate swaps. And again, we hadn't, up until then, we'd worked with external clients sales, but not with anybody on the trading desk, because historically on the interest rate swaps desk, it's mostly voice trades, so and the electronic trades that are coming through another automated system. But they were designing a pricing module for these traders, and they said, as has been historically done, developers had worked on automating several of these functions, and they had been working on it for 2 years. They put it into UAT, which is where the traders need to, kind of approve or disapprove, and the traders refused to use it. So of course, the development team, scrambling to figure out what the hell's gone wrong, came to us thinking that perhaps if we make the design prettier, that traders would use it. Of course, we then help them understand really not what UX is about. So I'll speak a little bit more in detail about that example, when we talk about lean UX approach. But the point to make here is that the first thing we had to do was immerse ourselves in the domain knowledge, right? It was actually being able to understand the language, understand the problem, understand the users, the context, what were they trying to accomplish. And I'll explain some of the details later on, but it was quite an interesting exercise. So this is, when I talk about domain, the first thing is the terminology, right? So you can start to see, acronyms galore, alphabet soup. And again, with different desks, it's different, very different language. So I was sitting with the sales team this week for US Treasuries. RFQs is not something that they use, but FX trading completely understands that language. So it was interesting that we need to understand that jargon, that the jargon between even the trading desks is different. So the annual objective within my team usually is, learn about a new asset class, take take training on trade life cycle. Fortunately, at Deutsche Bank, this is something that's offered in-house. Personally, I listen to a lot of Bloomberg, read a lot of Wall Street, Financial Times, because again, as I said, there's limited literature, and then ever-changing landscape. You've got regulatory changes, you've got confidential projects, different banks have different procedures, different technologies. And everyone develops a product for different global audiences, where again, the local markets, dictate certain regulations. There are lots of nuances in terminology, limited access to what competitors are doing. Unless, of course, somebody's come from those companies, and again, you really can't take the information about their systems and bring it or share that in-house. There's, again, limited access about that. And then traders and sales, as I mentioned, right? They're often busy, unavailable to do research, as I mentioned earlier. So this is what a typical trader setup looks like. I'm not kidding. Seriously, and they're paying attention to all of these monitors at the same time. They're able to listen to what the salesperson is yelling to them from another row, and they're on phone, and then chat messages in like 20 windows. It's just insane. This is the setup. So imagine trying to do usability testing in this kind of environment. So sales have about 4 monitors. They're constantly chatting with clients on Bloomberg, monitoring electronic trade activity, responding to client inquiries. So this is the example of an FX trading system. Again, as you can see, right? It's completely, there are different systems for rates and credit, lots of jargon. There could be, typical project for us is again a single dealer, multi-dealer platform, indicative data, sales trading workflow. Now, this one is an interesting screenshot. Does this look familiar to anybody? It's actually an Excel spreadsheet. So, yeah, it was funny actually, as we were doing the usability testing, one of the sales guys pulled it up, and I actually asked him, I said, what application is that? And he turns around to look at me and says, that's Excel. Like, literally, just dumbfounded. How come you don't know this is Excel? So, yeah, this is kind of the pricing models that they use. Performance speed of utmost importance, maximizing screen real estate. If there's white space, we get the feedback that that it's not optimal use of screen real estate. We generally can't use markups or real client data and markups, and again, they have to be keyboard friendly. So while yes, we're moving away from keyboards in other areas, in this case, these guys are still very glued to Bloomberg terminals, as was mentioned earlier, so very, very keyboard friendly. And then interestingly, this is really how UX is not UI, but this is how UX wants to be seen. And this is how UX is typically seen. We just do interface design and visual design. So there's a lot of things that we still for us to be really institutionalized in the investment banking space, there's a lot more work to be done. Usability testing, so this is why I was saying about jargon. If you can try reading this task, right? I want to price a 6-month, 10-month Euro USD even spot, near leg spot. You have to understand the language, and this is the way the task has to be worded. I know typically, heuristics, right? Okay, make the user interface jargon-free, make it plain English. Not something you can do here. This is their language. You have to speak that language and be comfortable speaking that language. And this is different across asset classes. So I'm only giving an example of the FX task, but rates, credit. So there's a lot of domain to cover. So the second skill is that's important. And again, with these skills, what I really mean, or these competencies, what I really mean is that you don't have to become a business analyst tomorrow. You don't have to become an architect tomorrow. But what you do need to understand is what they do. What value do they provide? How do these the information that they create, they produce or collect, how does that influence user experience design? And how you can influence their decisions in the same way, in terms of the type of questions they ask when they're asking for when they're doing requirements gathering, or when they're designing the architecture. So, how many of you actually work with BAs? Just show of hands. All right, more than 50%. Okay. So, at Deutsche Bank and even at JP Morgan, you'll see the ratio of UX to BA lopsided completely. We have about 400. I think when I started at Deutsche Bank, it was about 400 BAs to, at its peak, we were about 40 UX. So you can see about 10%. And so yeah, a real project management nightmare because when they had to source us, there was hardly anybody available. UX is seen as part of requirements gathering process, and if it's a small project, then given the tools of today, balsamic, a BA can just as easily produce a mock-up to elicit requirements. They may not apply the right design principles, but as I mentioned before, the UX is seen only as making the interface pretty. Then the only way to break that myth is to have good analysis skill. So a couple of, I think it was about 4 years ago, we started, the bank had heavily invested in iRise because again, the thinking had been, you get iRise, you give it to BAs, you've got great design. And big mistake, $2 million later, they kind of realized they've got zero adoption of iRise. Not to mention, I don't know if anybody's from iRise is here, but wasn't very user-friendly, unfortunately, did not work for us. We created libraries. It's again a tool that is a bit more complex, and once people immerse themselves, they learned it, but it wasn't something you could just install and run with. It did take a while. So as it said, it's not what you're called, it's what you do. So BAs and user experience practitioners both employ analysis and design thinking to bridge the gaps between business needs, user needs, and technology. While BA and UX practitioners may have diverse titles, like user experience designer, business process analyst, functional analyst, even product manager, the importance is not in the title, but in the competencies they bring to their projects. BA and UX skills, as you can see, overlap quite a bit. And traditionally, BAs are thought to have more of the business or stakeholder focus, and UX is seen as more of the sort of user focus. Having managed both, so at MYB, when I started my career as a product manager, went into design, I actually managed both BAs and UX early on. And I think to be successful either as a BA or UX, you have to have a lot, you have to know a lot about what the other does. It was a skill that, at least what made us successful was they sat together. They were part of the same team. It wasn't separate. The other aspect is architecture. So understanding the relationship between software architecture and usability is important to ensure that the system ultimately achieves the usability objective. Equally important, however, is expressing this relationship in terms that can be understood by both software engineers and usability specialists. Usability specialists determine which aspects of usability are appropriate for a given task or application, and software engineers evaluate that aspect of usability within the context of the architecture and implement them within the time, cost, performance, availability, security, and other constraints. So architecture is obviously one aspect of the system designed, as well as presentation, as well as functionality, and achieving better usability through software, it's not a new goal, right? Both researchers, practitioners have been concerned with the software architecture design techniques required to support usability. These techniques are focused on selecting correct overall system structure, then showing how the structure will deliver the modifiability needed while supporting performance and functionality. And there's a great emphasis on architecture within, obviously, firms like Deutsche Bank, because the next slide you're about to see is this is a typical architecture. This is actually of a trading system. This is a simpler, cleaner version. This is not what the reality usually is. The reality could have legacy systems, could have could have obviously different architectures, different trade life cycles for different products and different asset classes. As I said, legacy systems, multiple apps that do the same function. And having a basic understanding of the architecture will help a UX practitioner understand the limitations and perhaps better influence design decisions when the systems are redesigned. This happens a lot with us. When we're trying to do, obviously, as I mentioned, we come into a project when it's sometimes already designed and developed, which means architecture decisions have been long been made. And so we're coming and we're asking them to rethink some of those structural changes, structural decisions they've made. And that's difficult at that point. And so as they are, when they're thinking about new systems, is sort of when we're trying to, if we have an understanding of how the old architecture worked and what the limitations were, we're able to influence those designs in the future, as we go forward when they redesign. I think somebody earlier also mentioned technical savvy. Banks were not born digital, right? At least the big ones that have been around for more than 20, 30 years, they had established business and they worked without technology. As PCs and enterprise applications were introduced, applications tended to have a very long lifespan. If it wasn't broken, don't fix it. And that sometimes still exists right now, right? The funding, the limited funding, it has to go to the key projects. So there's a lot of legacy apps that could have been there for 20, 30 years, and the people that have developed it are long gone. Within the banks that I worked with, I found that replacement process is very slow. Decommission can take several years. You could be, and even after you've sort of had the replacement system, they kind of let the legacy system just stay there because they've got 2 or 3 users in Tokyo or Japan, in Melbourne or somebody, and they just need to keep it there. So it will always remain part of that portfolio, which just makes it very complex to keep, for UX especially, because you've always got to think about that user, not just the new user. Apps tend to be written also in different technologies. So given the siloed nature of various businesses, the stronger the tech savvy, the better. So currently, I think the team, and it's the same situation no matter which banks that I worked at, whether JP, and actually prior to JP it was with Bear Stearns, which I don't mention anymore, but and now with Deutsche Bank. It's you're looking at not just knowing tools to prototype, tools that are development tools for wireframing. So you've got HTML, you've got, we had Flex a few years ago, .NET, XAML, and Flex. I mean, look at that. It was just 6 years ago that everybody was designing in Flex, and today everybody is replacing it. I can speak of 2 examples here that helped us make good decisions. So age-old question. I don't know how many of you guys face the same thing, but can UX design or design the UI that need not be thrown away? So that in the case of institutional trading platforms, instead of them creating an balsamic and throwing it away, or Illustrator or whatever, can they create it in Expression Blend and give us the code? And to do that, you kind of have to have some technical savvy to understand. Okay, well, yes, you can design it, but then where is that the best use of your? Is that helping you achieve the optimal design? And or is the tool becoming limiting? And I think in our case, having that technical savvy to be able to use those tools really helped us make the right decision. That at this point, Expression Blend wasn't ready for the environment that we were working in. Global teams spread out in 4 different countries, running into a lot of compilation issues. So we decided, what, this is not the right time. We park it, come back and revisit it in the future. For now, we'll continue with not getting bogged down by those type of technical details. And then another example is about so as I mentioned, 4 to 5 locations. We've got dev centers. I mean, Deutsche Bank, I think, is in, oh my God, I can't even remember the countries, maybe, I don't know, 40 to 80 countries. Development centers that we work with, there are about 7 to 8 locations that at least my team works with. Makes it very complex. Your different methodologies being followed, different tools being used. So it's in this particular case when we often see that when UI, visual design is passed on to developers, what comes out of the development teams are they don't look exactly like what you've given them. So how do you close that gap? So one of the things that we did was really work closely with the development team to make sure that the framework had consistent, and the stylings within .NET and WPF had consistent theming and naming convention. So developers didn't need to worry about, okay, well, what is this line called? Instead, there was a button that had a style, and they could just take all the components and apply it. So very much like a CSS model. But again, having that technical savvy, working with developers, framework users from different, framework developers from different locations, had a lot of debates, came up with a solution that worked for them so that it wasn't, it was something that reduced actually the UI development time by 50% in our case. And what you see as a finished product that comes out of those frameworks is really, very professional looking. It's not something that, one of the developers slapped together. Another aspect is data visualization. So with focus on big data, of course, extremely large data sets that may have to be analyzed computationally to reveal patterns, data visualization is here to stay. However, it's not just applicable to big data, and visualization can be applied to everyday tasks as well. So traditionally, most information is displayed in a grid format with a lot of columns and a lot of scrolling, as you can see in the next slide. Right, very typical representation. And I remember for a synthetic equities platform that when I started at Deutsche, it was a reporting system, and they had 90 columns. And the reason it was designed that way was they started with 20, and they gave the users the option to add, the other 70. But every different user group was asking for different columns to be added, so they decided, let's just add all 90 to the default view. So which it took forever to load. Performance was horrible, and obviously, for every piece of information that they wanted to use, they had to scroll. Not the easiest thing. So instead of really understanding the user goals and tasks, the dev team just kind of went off and did the 90-column view. Needless to say, users never used it. So as an example of data visualization, this is now in the public domain. So you can probably see videos of this on YouTube as well. This is an application of an application at Deutsche Bank. It's used by the risk area. So they developed this risk management platform designed to provide analytics that allow risk managers to make better informed decisions. It's called Horizon. And the platform is pure in-house built, and it actually won the bank a Business IT Innovation Award in 2012. It minimizes the dependency on PowerPoint. So as you can imagine, right, if the data is kept in all these grids, a lot of times upper management, what they're trying to do is pull it together, put it in PowerPoints to present to management. Instead, this tool, it delivers data in timely, integrated way, provides an intuitive, highly graphical user interface, this was to enhance the quality of discussions around key decisions. So within 4 clicks, starting from firm-wide, at global Deutsche Bank level, it could consolidate market risk exposure of the firm. You could drill down into patterns and causes of limit breaches. It uses an Oracle database and Java for business logic layer and HTML5 and CSS3. And this provides a credit risk view at the global level, and this is just the beginning. Similar visualizations are being looked upon, for usage analytics and how to monetize pre-research. As I mentioned, research is a big cost to sales and trading. So one of the things that they're trying to look at is how do you monetize that, but again, show that information visually so that you can make effective decision on what research is actually useful and what's just being published. And you have 400 people doing research. And does pre-trade information result in trades? We've recently also worked on something called order management, where in order management, instead of just being a grid, we're kind of showing on a timeline what time the orders are coming in, where the orders, what orders are being fulfilled, what time, to help, again, traders and sales, and even clients to get a better understanding of the orders that they have in the market. And last but not the least is lean UX. So it's a set of principles that may be used to guide you better, more desirable solutions for users. It's not process in which tools are used very rigidly. So when I started at Deutsche about 5 years ago, there's a lot of conversation about lean and agile development, but not so much, not so much about UX or lean UX, but again, then UX was not very well known. So consciously in my team, we decided to follow what has now become the principles in Lean Manifesto, right? We do have common tools, but we're very flexible rather than rigid, when it comes to what to use. So with every project, we decide where is that project at? Will it make sense for us to, have to go through the lengthy process of, research design and, research testing, design, research design testing, or is there research that's already available that we can gather, and how do we make that process lean? We also have templates, but again, we make a decision, when to follow the templates, again, where the documentation is important, where it's not important. Sometimes we do mock-ups, and then just to see if it's even worth, proceeding with the idea. So it's not always where the project has to be formally approved, and but sometimes it's more about, okay, let's help the business decide, is it even worth considering this idea, because they may have allotted, 3 months or something as funding for this project, but reality is it's going to take us a year to design this in an ideal way, so let's abandon this, after they've looked at the design. So as I mentioned very early on at the beginning, at the interest rate swaps project, right? So the use case there was, this was 2 years of development, probably more than $1 million of development already, and traders refused to use it. Clearly, some heads were on the chopping block. So the use case was where a price request appeared, and unfortunately I can't share the screens because they're, again, internal proprietary systems, but the use case really was a trade would come in from the market, a trader had to see it. The way the design was developed, again, grid format, so you had a row of 40 columns, and in a small cell was a clickable space for the trader to say, yes or no, I accept this client's trade or not at this price. And the trader had to respond to this request in 3 seconds, right? And clearly that wasn't happening. In 3 seconds, we were not able to consume that information in that row, and imagine these things are coming in, quite fast. So when the market is very volatile, lots of requests coming in. When the market's not volatile, okay, it may, that's all right. They can take their time to respond to it. But so when they were ready to take the action, like I said, the input controls were small, so we designed a paper prototype. Now, you saw the trader screen, right? 8 monitors. What do? You can't really put something in front of them, and we had to do this very agile way. So we put a paper prototype. We did one-hour usability sessions with about 8 traders from UK, New York, and Australia. And in the course of 2 weeks, we were able to narrow down really what was the information they needed. So first we started with concepts. We reduced it down to 20 columns by working with BAs and some SMEs. And then we started pointing to the user what was the information that they needed to make that, to make a decision on that trade. And it came down to about 6 pieces of information that was really needed. So there were 6 economic details that they needed. We were able to create a ticket instead of this row grid, and on the ticket we designed groups of essential pieces of information. And traders were able to literally, I think it went down from about 11 seconds of them taking, taking that action to down to 3 seconds, or actually less than 3 seconds. So needless to say, that was a big success. And that whole project from, start to finish with us not ever knowing the domain took about, I'd say, 8 weeks. So to recap, it's, as I mentioned, it's really about knowing the domain. It's business analysis, technical savvy, data visualization, and lean UX is sort of what I see for a successful future in capital markets.